Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Ableton Lounge and the first of today's Trailblazers talks with Richie Hawtin. My name is Ken Taylor, and I'm the managing editor of DJ Tech Tools in San Francisco. Richie Hawtin's been DJing and performing electronic music since the late 80s under a variety of names, I guess. The most well-known, of course, being Plastic Man. He played a formative role in the evolution of techno music in Windsor and Detroit, and running both the +8 and Minus labels. The former of which is about to celebrate its 25th anniversary next year. Of course, he continues to shape electronic music, all over the world, performing and educating young producers and DJs, and as of 2 years ago, establishing his first residency in Ibiza called Enter, which you'll probably get a taste of tonight if you go to Metropolis. While Richie's early career was heavily influenced by the technology around him, he's done his fair share of influencing the technology himself, being involved in everything from mixer and controller design to being an early proponent of selling music online as well. And for his Plastic Man Live relaunch from a few years back, he began integrating Max for Live into his setup and started using Ableton's push controller to sort of further extend those possibilities of what you can do both in performing and producing. So we're going to talk about those things today and a lot more, of course. But first, welcome to the stage, Richie Hawtin.
Yeah, I guess Ken's going to ask me a series of questions, and we're going to meander through those and hopefully find something interesting to talk about. And at the end, I think Ken's going to open it up for questions too. So if you have something or we talk about something that you want to know more about, just wait till the end and we'll try to answer as many as we can.
Yeah, for sure. And when you do that, by the way, we are recording today's talk. So once the mic is in your hand, make sure to talk into it so we can actually get your voice on the recording. There's been this theme of control that's sort of like a running theme throughout your career, whether it's like gear design or the Control Beyond EDM college tour. Would you say that extending the boundaries of control has been like a goal of yours throughout your career? I was always a control freak since I was a little kid. I think one of the reasons I liked electronic music. Let me just step back. I never thought I was going to be a musician. I was always creative. I thought I was going to do something creative with my life. But being a musician or someone on stage or something like that, although probably every kid hoped to be Prince or something like that, I never thought I would actually be able to do that. I was too shy and introverted. And because of being like that, I felt very connected and close to technology at a young age, specifically a computer. Well, first video games, and then my VIC-20 computer and my Commodore 64. And I spent a lot of time at my parents' house programming late into the night, instead of going out and maybe doing sports and what other kids were doing. And so I loved being by myself and programming little video games. Later, being on a bulletin board and using very early modems to talk to people around the world. And just, being able to turn on or turn off when I wanted and tell the computer to do things that I wanted it to do and not what other people wanted it to do. And that slowly progressed into finding out that these computers could actually make music. So, it was very much about, control from that point. And that's really been central to all the projects that I've got myself involved in over the years. Whether it was Plastic Man or DJing or even, to a certain extent, Enter, what we're doing on Ibiza now. There's a certain amount of control I have there to bring people together, artists, DJs, decorations, to control the overall experience. And so those are probably actually two key words, control and experience, which kind of run through whatever I'm doing. Fair enough. So now that the level of control has scaled up so much over the years, how do you react to or deal with instances in which control kind of like if things fall out of control? Or do they? I mean, do you do enough to ensure that they don't? Yeah, it's, you know, you don't want to actually, you know, I guess the perfect idea is controlling everything, you know, if you're doing a show, the lights, the visuals, all these things. But if there aren't mistakes, if there aren't things that are beyond your control, it could actually get a bit too boring. You know, it's a fine line, especially when it comes to live performances. When we did the Plastic Man show, originally here 10 years ago in MUTEK, the idea was for me to control as much of the experience as possible, but without having everything locked down to a certain time code or making too many decisions. So you come up with technologies to give you control, but allow spontaneous control. And that's very, very important, because when you're doing, you know, you don't want it to turn into a Madonna show where everything is controlled, but to the second of timing, and you see the same show over and over and over again. And that's another thing that's really important for me, is to, because I come from a DJ perspective, whatever I'm doing, I like to move left and right and change as much as possible each performance, but still, you know, control multiple parts of the experience. So it gets very complicated and convoluted very, very fast. And the more complex the situation becomes, the greater there is, the more room there is for error or malfunctions. That's also, you know, I like that. It's a little bit like living on the edge when you're performing. It's a good type of energy.
Yeah, I mean, clearly you don't want things to be boring. So what are the things you look for in technology that inspire you, that keep you from getting bored, I guess?
You know, with the sense of technology, everything is always moving forward. You can, you know, I don't know. As an artist, I think you have a certain amount of ideas in your head, and interacting, whether you're a painter and you're, you know, using different paintbrushes or experimenting with different types of paint or materials, that's kind of what's changing, but the actual idea that's in your head or the concept that you're presenting is perhaps not changing as much as the tools you're using. And that's, you know, so from the very early on, I wanted to, you know, whether it was a warehouse in Detroit and we were covering things with black plastic to control the experience, or whether it's Plastic Man now, you know, the idea is relatively the same, but it's the development of technology or my access to new technologies or greater technologies that allow me to reinterpret those same or similar ideas that I'm trying to build on throughout my career.
You must obviously have access to tons of technology all the time, right? Like, how do you streamline that process of focusing on something then, of focusing on one piece of gear, or do you?
Yeah, that's actually, it's much harder to focus on things these days, just because there is so many possibilities with technology. There's also, in my situation right now, I have more options, but actually less time to explore them all, just because I have so many projects going on. So I've always liked to work with a great team who can share ideas and experiment things with me or for me, and then have a language and a conversation back and forth. But you know, and I'm not very good at this, but you have to set some kind of guidelines and limits somewhere along the project that you're doing. You know, if I look back at the biggest mistakes and what we learned from the first Plastic Man show here in 2004, was that we wanted to do everything. And we never, you know, I didn't set limits for myself or guidelines, and none of my team and friends dared to tell me I couldn't do something. So they were like, yeah, okay, we can do that, let's try it. And we were changing things up until 48 hours before the show. And the only reason we didn't change things 24 hours before the show was because 48 hours before the show, in some hotel room around here, everything crashed and we had to start rebuilding just from scratch what we had worked on for 6 months. So later on, when we revisited the Plastic Man project, kind of looked at that and said, okay, these are the things, what do we really want to achieve here? What are the A-list things that we have to achieve in this show or in this album or whatever project we're working on? And what are the things we'd like to see but we don't necessarily need to go forward with the project? So, you know, I think that goes into every type of project that any of you may be involved in life, but especially for music and electronic music and performance. You know, there's so many plugins, there's, you know, so many pieces of new hardware coming out. It's impossible to stay up on top of it all and be at the top of your game. So you need to kind of make some choices and say, okay, these are the 10 plugins that I really like. I'm going to use these ones for this album. And when the album's done, I'm going to look at the next new plugins. Or for me, my DJ setup gets little incremental changes throughout the year, but usually the big changes comes in January, February, March, where I look at what's out there, and I say, okay, this is what I want to use, and then I lock into that. And over the year, I get better and better at it. And by also practicing and using technology, you start to learn perhaps its limitations or the things that you wished it could do, and you kind of put those into your mind and bring that back again the next January and February. So it's, if not, you're just going to be forever. You know, I have lots of friends who are forever in their studio or forever talking about a new performance and just testing things and playing and trying everything, but the actual production or performances aren't actually that good because they never have enough time to get into the actual idea that they had in the first place.
Do you feel like you make records influenced by the live show, or is it like how does that balance happen with does the live show influence the record, or does the record influence the live show, or is it sort of an even split?
I think now they really interact with each other much more than, well, it feels like they interact much more than they did in the past because, you know, maybe I'm trying to think this, if I'm going to say the right thing here, but, well, the thing, you know, in the studio, for me, say 20 years ago, I'd have all this equipment, and, you know, I would record and finish something, and then when you wanted to take that into a live show, you would actually have to subtract, and, you know, you could only carry so many 909s or TB303s, so you would minimize and create live interpretations of those tracks, and then go out on the road. And maybe something along on the road would inspire you to take back to the studio, but I didn't find that happen. It didn't happen so much.
Okay.
And now, using a very similar type of setup, whether it's actually for me DJing live or in the studio, using something like Ableton, Push, or some other controllers, it all kind of bleeds together. So when I'm, you know, DJing, you know, I use Push in my DJ shows, so I'm adding drum fills and percussion and doing a lot of like grabbing things and detuning, very typical kind of Plastic Man stuff. And as I'm doing that on top of other people's records, I'm kind of thinking, well, this would be really cool if it was actually my record under there, and kind of take that back into the studio and then work on that. It potentially becomes a track, or then gets into the Ableton file, which could be the next Plastic Man live file, and it very seamlessly moves back and forth. So it's really hard to say what drives another. I think they're all driving each other at different times, okay, depending on what project I'm working on, or you know, where my focus is.
See, because the thing that got me thinking about it was the first Dex Effects and 909 record, where to me it seemed like you were bringing, you know, your DJ experience was already more than just two turntables and a mixer. It was also the you know, the 909 and the effects and stuff, and then you brought that experience into like a mix album.
Yeah, the first and second Dex Effects albums, I'm trying to remember. First one's '98, so this was actually pre-Ableton. Ableton was like this, they were working on it and people were talking about it, but nobody could get it. And so there was a really cool program at that time called Acid, which I used to lock up all the loops and then throw it in Pro Tools. But basically, the concept of the album was, I want to DJ like this. I want to play more than one part on top of each other. I didn't want to do 3 or 4 turntables. I wasn't actually technically that good to keep all. I wasn't Jeff Mills. I always wanted to be Jeff, but that wasn't my path. But I wanted to layer things, and so the first DE9 albums were like, this is what I hope to do live in a couple of years. And then Ableton came out, which didn't actually become important for my DJ performances until much later, but then the whole revolution of Final Scratch and all the digital vinyl systems came out. And one of the reasons why I was, my partner John Acquaviva and I were so excited about that technology, why we invested in that technology and were kind of the first ones out with that, was not that it could just allow me to take 10,000 records with me. It was because I could do micro edits and custom things and start to take small steps to that place of remixing on the fly and adding more layers. And then of course as things developed, and then Final Scratch became Traktor, and Traktor had 4 turntables, all that eventually started to realize the dream that was actually, that I'd put together in a recorded album on Dex and Effects a couple of years earlier.
What was sort of the tenor in the industry when things really switched to digital DJing, or when they actually started to rear its head, and you guys were sort of at the forefront of it?
Yeah, that was it was really, really interesting time. Like I don't know the age of everybody here, but digital DJing now and seems so commonplace. Even everyone using CD players seems commonplace. But in 1998, 99, 2000, CD players were kind of looked down upon. And it was, you're only cool if you're playing vinyl, which I guess is kind of the sense again now. But we were, John Acquaviva and I were at a conference called MUTEK, which was in the south of France. And we've been going there for a couple of years, every January, meeting other electronic music makers and distributors. And at that time, we had +8, Minus was going. We had great relationships with all the vinyl distributors. We actually had our own record pressing plant in Canada for a couple of years. So we were kind of like, well respected in that world. And on this day, we unveiled and announced Final Scratch. It was amazing. It was like, we did this demonstration, and we were showing people, okay, this file's playing from the computer. And everyone's like, okay, that's kind of cool. But nobody really got it. So then we had someone come up on the microphone and say something straight into the computer and said, hi, this is Final Scratch. And then instantly, we put the file in and started scratching it. And suddenly, the penny dropped, and the whole place was quiet. And I'll never forget seeing all these colleagues and all these business partners that we'd had for years suddenly go from friends to kind of enemies. Wow. Honestly, we were kind of naive. Like, we were so excited by the technology that we didn't really think, even for our own businesses, of the business repercussions. And over the next weeks and months, we really felt more than a cold shoulder from dozens, if not hundreds, of people within the record industry who, were sustained by people like us making records and having record labels. And we were shooting ourselves in the foot also if it was the wrong idea. But we were just so enamored and excited by what this offered on a creative performance level that we just went with it. But you know, it took a long time for things to slowly develop. But now, what are we, 14 years later? And you know, you have your vinyl market, you have a increased size of a CD market for people using CD players, and you have digital turntable systems. And I think the creativity that has come, the added creativity that has come from the DVS systems is absolutely incredible. The controllerisms and people cutting things up and, you know, just, yeah, this is what, at least, you know, I was dreaming of in those early days, you know, when I was doing, you know, decks and effects. But even, sorry, all my questions, answers are long, sorry. But even stepping back, you know, this is, again, that wasn't a new idea that I had in 98, 99, that I wanted to do that. I was just building upon very basic ideas that I've had since day one. And those ideas also came from watching the people who inspired and me to become a DJ. You know, watching Jeff Mills play 3 or 4 decks and a 909, and you know, just destroying records that you knew, and you're like, what the fuck is he doing? You know, what is that record? Searching for the record, and then realizing it was record 1, 2, and 3 on top of each other, one going backwards and one going forwards, and then a 909 a clap, and you're like, well, fuck, I'll never make that record. But I'm going to try, you know, so I hope I live up to that reputation, and you know, that I try to make that record again. He'll never make that record, I'll never make that record again, because it's all about spontaneity and living in the moment. So, yeah, so back to Jeff, also to, you know, when I used to watch Derek May in the early days, and even in my first gigs in Detroit at the Shelter, in 88, 89, I would take a little effects processor with me, put flanges on top, and Derek would play with the EQ. So that was all I knew. You know, it wasn't Chicago or New York where they had long mixes, you know, and they were putting gospel vocals on top. No, it was the Motor City. It was rough, it was futuristic, and it was, yeah, back to your first thing about making a mistake. You had all this technology, but you set it all up, and then you try to get a system that you feel really good with, confident with, and then you go for it in front of people. And some of those things, some things are going to work, some mistakes are going to happen. Sometimes the mistakes are the most beautiful thing, but it's live. It's visceral, and that's what, you know, that was techno to me. That's what techno is to me now.
Sure. On that note, I want to roll back to a MUTEK moment from 2003 when you guys performed the first Narodniki performance here, which was, for any of you who don't know, was sort of like a 9-man techno supergroup.
I think it was the first time that anyone in techno called something a supergroup.
I would say that's true. Yourself, Luciano, Ricardo Villalobos, Zip, a number of other people were involved.
Daniel Bell.
Yep. When I watched that show from the crowd, I was aware of Ableton Live. It was a very early version, obviously. What were you guys actually doing up there? How do you run 8 versions of Live at the same time with Mono Lake on the board?
It's actually back to, you know, making things. It's very easy to make technology, come up with ideas and make technology really, really complicated. That's Plastic Man 2004, and lots of things break down. And in later shows with Narodniki, with, say, the supergroup of 6, 7, 8 really good artists coming together, we tried different ways to sync each other up. We had, you know, for those of you who understand, we had some MIDI routing, we had MIDI over LAN, we had some sync cables. And the more we tried to use technology to bring us all together in time, the more it didn't work. And actually, the more perfect timing is, it becomes too robotic. You lose some of the humanity of the groove. So that first show, some of us had Ableton, quite a lot of us did. Some of us had just other equipment. And we were all basically saying, okay, what tempo are we going to start at? It's like 124, and it was always, then it was like, okay, ready? 1, 2, 3, start. And then hope that everybody was in time. And mostly it worked. And then later we learned, later I think, I don't remember if Ableton had it in the first versions where you can push and pull the tempo.
Okay.
Could you, I don't know, someone from Ableton. Anyway, well, we found different ways to slowly push the tempo faster and slower. I think at that point it really was taking the tempo at 124 and going 125, okay, 124 or 123, and trying to bring everybody into phase. But what was amazing about that was that the slight out of phase timing gave, a real special feeling. You hear about some people saying the old machines have a great feeling. The 808 has a special feeling. The 909 drum machine has a special feeling. They do, because they all have different microprocessors on board. And they calculated their timing in slightly different ways, and sometimes weren't actually always like a Swiss clock. They're kind of moving, and that's the feeling of those machines. So actually, Narodniki, each time we did it, also had its own specific kind of feeling. So this is also really an ultra important now in DJing, especially with DVS systems. If you've got two CDs players playing, or vinyl or whatever, 909, if they're not all synced up, which most CDs and turntables don't sync up, you have to do it by hand. And there's not really many people out there who can match two records absolutely perfect. And so this slight little on and off thing is what gives, a DJ their certain feeling. Ricardo mixes a certain way. It's not just about the music they're putting. It's not just about the volume or the EQ. It's how he hears and how his ears line up to records. So with DVS systems, there's always this complaint that there's this auto sync feature. And if everybody's using the same auto sync feature, then everybody can actually start to not sound the same, well, possibly, but they can all start to feel the same. And so it's very important to find your way through that technological advancement of not worrying about syncing, because I press auto sync. But for me, what I do, I auto sync, but all the records are slightly out of phase. So I'm pushing and pulling and finding what sounds good to me, what in sync sounds good to me, and then that becomes, again, the Hawtin feel. So that's, that's the underlining, if you can hear, so when you hear two DJs play the same records, and you're just like, why can it sound so different? There's so many reasons, but this is a very basic underlining part of the atmosphere a DJ is creating. And one of the things that if you're using auto sync, I think the CD players have it on now too, you have to find, all the technology is great, but you have to find a way that you're still coming through the technology. If it's all down to algorithms or all down to zeros and ones, then you've lost something. And if it's all digitized, it's also easier to copy and replicate and duplicate. And then perhaps we are on the way of a DJ or a performer becoming an algorithm in a program.
Outside of the technology, what to you is sort of the essence of DJing and performing? What's the essence of DJing and performing to you? Like, aside from technology? Yeah.
Well, living spontaneously on the edge of performance and creation, and trying to find moments where you come completely in line to a brand new experience with you and the people in front of you or around you. That's why just playing one record for me, even though there's great records out there that should be and can be played by themselves, I want to, I'm always searching for that moment where you're like, fuck, that's it, you know? And if you can do that with a group of people in a room, it's absolutely, yeah, like next level.
I want to ask you a little bit about minus and plus 8 and how you've built your roster of artists over the years. And I'm curious as to what are sort of the hallmarks for you of what makes a great artist, or what you look for in new talent?
Continuity, taking basic ideas and growing and evaluating them and developing them, and I've lost the word, but yeah, well, just quality, and I have to say, like, personality too. You know, like, of course, it's all about the music, but you know, I'm not sitting up here because it's just all about the music. You know, I have music, it's my personality, it's what I say, and it's how I act on stage. There's so many different things, and so those are kind of the artists I look for, who I'd like to help develop or support. So it's important to get a number of demos from artists and listen to them, see what I like, listen to their good ones and their bad ones, but see that there's a language, that they're trying to do something, that they're on their own path. Even early on, it's sometimes hard to see that because everyone's, you know, my first tracks, I was trying to be Derek May for a record, and I was trying to be someone else, and so everyone's copying, but there's got to be some type of originality there. And then it's important for me to meet the people, and just get a general feeling of their personality, you know, because, yeah, developing an artist, inviting an artist onto the minus or plus 8 family is like inviting someone into your house, you know. Sure, you have some visitors who just come once or twice, but it's much cooler if you grow with people and have relationships and you know, what's the word? Celebrate their successes and talk about the not so good projects, and yeah. So that's why I always refer to the whole minus and plus 8 gang as some type of family. It should be like that. That's also what makes our whole scene really, really special. Why I also believe it's so strong right now at this point in history is that the foundation of our scene on so many levels has been built up by families of like-minded people, labels of strong direction and sense of purpose, whether it was UR or Transmet in the early days, or Cocoon, you know, or what we were doing. But this just allowed a real deep sense of being and purpose, and helped all of us work together to create an incredible scene that didn't need, at least for many years, really any commercial sustainability or help.
Okay. You still keep your studio in Windsor, the primary production studio, yeah?
I go back and forth between Windsor and Berlin and everywhere else in between. Yeah, but I have a studio in Windsor, a studio in Berlin. It depends. Like, I've just finished a new project recently, and you know, I wrote most of the material just in the corner of my living room, really with basic setup, a couple of pieces of gear, Ableton push, a nice pair of speakers, and then kind of finish those tracks in the studio in Windsor, where I had basically bigger speakers so I could actually EQ and get into things.
Well, can I jump in for a sec? Can we pull up those photos on the screen? We have,
sure.
Yeah. First photo, if we can. Yeah, so here you are.
Unfortunately, I built this studio and then decided to move to Berlin, and that one's in Windsor, so I don't get to go there very often. But the important thing of this photo is the big speakers to the left and right. I've got not the Genelecs, the ones really far left and right, which are these old Tannoy speakers, which I've been using smaller versions, but those speakers since 1993, and I really like the sound. But why I love coming to this room is that usually when I'm in Windsor, nobody knows I'm there. So I see my mom, my dad, my brother, one or two friends, and then I can hibernate here. It's in a house which is not connected to anybody else. So I like to play really loud, and that gets louder and louder as I get older and older. but yeah, like, you know, one of the hardest things for me at this, well, I think for the big challenge for all artists is, you know, you have all the time in the world to sit around in the studio and create, and something wonderful comes out of that, and then that, you know, that takes you to into the public world of performance and promotion and everything else, and then you have less and less time to actually work on music and other things, and even just when you have time, just to find that you can be really, really focused and make use of that time. So, you know, my situation the last, let's say this last 6 or 8 months, when I've been actually really productive, I'd be in Berlin working on various projects, being at the Minus office, working on business stuff in the day, and especially in winter, I would get home, and most people hate the winter in Berlin because it's really dark and depressing. But I love getting home when it's around 6 o'clock and it's already getting dark, because as it gets dark, somehow my business brain turns off and I could just, you know, sit in the corner and write. But there's still lots of things going on in Berlin, so that focus time was still not as long as I wanted. So as soon as I had, you know, as soon as I had momentum and I was actually writing and I was happy with stuff, there came a point where I was like, okay, now I need to focus even more. That's when I went back to Windsor. But then just to finish the story, so it was writing in Berlin, kind of, say, mastering and finalizing tracks here. And then actually in January and February, I went away and I was in an island in the Philippines, and I bought a pair of speakers in the little hut I was staying at, and I did there, you know, 5 or 6 weeks of editing. So that was actually the first time I had done a project in 3 different places. And it actually was probably the first time I what's the word, benefited from you know, how mobile a studio really can be these days, because all of that stuff would have had to have been done in one place 10 or 15 years ago.
So what's in the mobile studio?
Mobile studio is really, yeah, laptop, push, pair of speakers. Actually, that's the worst. We're going around and it's like, okay, you don't want to take speakers. So I have speakers dotted around the world right now. So
what do you
So if anyone wants to record in the Philippines, I have a good pair of speakers there.
How are you using Push then in that process?
Yeah, well, I use Push all the time, you know. So like you know, I come from old school 909, 808, 303 programming, where you have your 16 steps, sequencers, and you're turning things on and off. And I really like, as soon as Push came out, it was really clear and easy for me to take an hour and program beats and things like that. It's also the other thing that happens to, I think, musicians and producers. As you have some success, you start to buy new equipment, and everything gets complicated really fast. And around middle of last year, I was speaking to a couple of friends, producers, you know, from John Geiser from my label, and he was getting more complicated. He was buying some modular systems and was really getting sucked into the system. And it reminded me of when I first got modular systems, that I spent 1 or 2 years making weird sounds, but I actually didn't make any, really, I didn't make a good record. It was like, if I was making a soundtrack to a sci-fi movie, it was great, but there was nothing more. I was like, okay, I can't get stuck in that again. So don't go and buy a lot of modular system. Well, I did, but but then I learned to put it back away. Then I was talking to a good friend, Recondite, and watching some shows at the Enter gigs last year. Andreas TM404 was playing with us tonight. And just watching and realizing that most of my favorite artists out there right now have really, really, really simple setups. You know, kind of what I was saying about my DJ setup. They had simple setups where they were comfortable with those machines or those computers, and they were just able to sit down and write music. And I was always, the last couple of years, you know, doing exactly that for DJing, but for producing, I was actually making things too complex. So, you know, where was I going? So back to sitting in front of a computer and Push and 1 or 2 other pieces of equipment. I found once I sat down and started using Push, it was really easy and fun. And suddenly, you know, I've been with my girlfriend for the last 6 years, and she was never really seeing me write music. And then I remember this. I was like, she's like, "Do you just write that?" I was like, "Yeah." She's like in 20 minutes, it sounds amazing. I was like, "Yeah, that's how it should be." And it's just like all these things kind of like click back in, and it was really fun and easy, and you weren't, you know, getting too confused or you weren't putting too many technological walls around you, you know. So I was breaking those down. So yeah, so I'm actually just realizing as we're talking here about how complex I kept making my studio. Like, look, you know, this isn't actually full of stuff. When I first built it, it was full of stuff and lots of modular stuff. And you know, when I'm totally honest, the studio I had before this in Windsor was half this size, half the amount of equipment, and I wrote shitloads of music there. But I didn't write that much in here. Okay. You know, it was like we built it so large because I had all this equipment, and then when I got in there, it was like being like in Star Trek. But then I was like, hold on, let me change that thing over there, and then okay, I got to go over there. And I was always recording all my music hands-on, and I don't like, and I still don't like to record into any arrangement window or draw in modulation. I like to capture my movement. So quickly I realized that there was a huge design flaw in this studio. It was just way too fucking big.
Can we go to the next slide?
It looks really cool.
There's a yeah, so it's a little more simplified the closer you get up.
Yeah, actually, so that is the same studio, but with me focusing on just a couple of pieces of equipment and pretending everything else behind me doesn't exist anymore, and me actually writing music again.
And next one, please. Sorry, next slide, and then actually the one following that too. So this is a shot from the Guggenheim performance, the Plastic Man performance last November. Explain to us how that what happens in the live setting then versus that very reduced studio setting. Here's another water.
Thanks. So the other slides were me actually in the studio working on music for this show, and that was another reason why I knew I had to get away from using too much equipment and also not making things over complex, because the music I was recording in Berlin and in Windsor was going to be performed here in the Guggenheim. And I wanted to, again, just a personal preference, I didn't want to record a bunch of tracks and have a whole bunch of audio files and stems and just play them back. I wanted to have actually the whole studio on stage and have everything running. And what I mean by that, having MIDI information running synthesizers and having Push run drum loops, which I could change and really feel like there was a live performance going on. And so that's also why I had to minimize and come up with a very basic setup that could go from Berlin to Windsor to the Philippines and then onto the stage here. So you can, you know, of course I had a couple of other 303s and other devices that I used in the studio, but the basic setup was some faders, push, the iPad, and yeah, that's about it. It's pretty basic.
Can I have the next slide, please? Anyway, yeah, this is a little more of a detailed view of it.
But of course, you know, for the Plastic Men live shows, anyone who's seen it here 10 years ago or here 3-4 years ago, or at the Guggenheim, it comes back down to that control issue. The reason I do those shows is to try and, is to play with how audio and visuals and lighting all react together when one person is controlling them. So that's the other reason why I can't just come up and use audio stems. I need to have as much information running as possible from my computer systems that we can turn into information that can drive other systems. So you see lighting console on the left. You see a visual computer running LED displays next to it, then my computer, then audio over here. All those are tied together in a higher in a higher way than normal. Of course, my audio is always connected to the audio mixer, but what we did for, maybe I'm going to get too technical here, but there's a really interesting system called Dante, which is actually audio over Ethernet. And so once you're using that, any computers on the network up there can tap into any audio that's on my computer. You don't have to route wires or anything like this. This is like one of the, sure, it would be great to do a live show with all analog gear, but the complexities of using analog gear and taking audio from my 303 to the speakers and then also to the computer systems and into the lighting systems is not going to work. So going completely digital for this setup enabled us to route MIDI information, DMX lighting information, audio signals seamlessly between any of those systems. And once you have this network of information, it's very easy, well, relatively easy to say, okay, I want this musical information to go to the light system. And that musical information, instead of playing notes, to turn notes into colors, and vice versa. And that's really the system that we've been developing for all the Plastic Men shows for the last couple of years.
I want to show the next slide just really quickly so that people can also get, actually one more after that. Yeah, here we are. So this is the DJ setup. I won't have you go too much into it, but more just for the purposes of everyone getting to see it.
Yeah, this is actually like the, again, like before, what was really good for me is when I went into the studio to do the Guggenheim show last October, I'd already spent 6 months on tour with the push in my DJ shows, doing all those drum fills and things I was talking about. And so every time I play and I'm doing those and something's working really well, I'm like, okay, that could be good in the studio. Or, you know, I'm kind of multitasking, thinking, okay, well, if I'm doing this live, could that actually, you know, those movements be sent to the LED wall? Can we visualize my movements? So it's, you know, that idea of studio, production, performance, you know, being on the plane, being in the Philippines, being in Berlin, you know, it really is one big loop now. And you don't really know where there's going to be time to work or where inspiration's going to come or where a new idea is going to come. You know, right now we're developing, this is another big reason why I love Ableton, especially the last couple of years. They integrated Max for Live. So if you know programming, you can get under the hood of Ableton and really do some custom configurations and programming I don't do this. I gave up programming when I was 16, and I'm actually scared to get back into it because it would be another thing that would take me away from music making. But I have some great guys on the team that if Ableton doesn't do something that we need it to do, then you usually can make it happen. And I think that's the type of philosophy that we need from all companies in electronic, well, in all technology companies these days. You know, the more we can all customize and, you know, come up with little tricks to help each of us interface to our technology in our own specific ways, heightens the humanity for each of us that comes out through that technology. You know, of course, we all like playing on a drum machine or Porsche or Machina or whatever, but you know, I hit the buttons a bit differently than you hit the buttons, or you like the knobs and I like the faders. So the more we can, you know, we can find specific gear that works with our own unique ideas, the better. You know, this is ultra important also for people watching me and say, okay, like, here's my setup. I can, if anyone wants to know how I wired it up and how it's all connected, I'll draw you blueprints. There's no secrets here. But just because it sounds good with that setup for me doesn't mean it's going to sound good for you guys. You know, you really have to follow your own path and find your own connection to technology that works for you.
Awesome. We've just got a couple minutes left. I want to open up the floor for a couple questions. There's a mic rolling around here somewhere. We got time for about 2 questions, I would say. And please make sure to speak into the mic again.
Hi, Richie. Oh, sorry, too much into the mic. A quick question. The Windsor hum, does that come from your studio?
The Windsor what?
The Windsor hum.
The Windsor hum.
Yeah, have you heard of this phenomenon?
No. Is it the hum on my records that I don't hear?
No, there's a phenomenon in Windsor, Canada that people have been complaining about for a few years, and it's this random sound, and it's a deep, rumbling sound, and no one can figure out where it's coming from.
You should probably track to see when I was working in the studio, and if that happens at the same time they're complaining, we have an explanation.
Okay, thank you.
And one more up front here. Thanks a lot for passing that.
Hi there. Just asking about your performance setup. When you're running, let's say your DJ setup, but also Ableton, is there any kind of integration for like sync, or is that just?
No, that's a really good question. There's at different times we've had sync going back and forth. When we were doing the Contact shows a couple of years ago, which was me on Tractor, and then a number of live shows, Mark Hool, Geyser running Ableton. We had MIDI over Ethernet running all those together for a whole bunch of shows. But honestly, in the end, we felt, again, that it was becoming too robotic, or sometimes just wasn't functioning as stable as we thought. And so we all went back to, okay, what are you at, 124? Okay, start. And this is how I do, like, when I, in this setup, there's no sync. Whatever my Tractor is my master clock. And then at some point in my show, I go to Ableton, I set that at the same tempo, and I press start. And then on my X1 controllers, I have control over the phase offset for all my turntables and Ableton. So I can kind of push and pull, and because also it's like records or drum sounds, you know, they may sound perfectly on time for one record, and even if the next record is phase aligned in a similar way, it may not just feel good. So you're pushing and pulling again, and you know, especially my drums, sometimes, you know, they're a bit off, and sometimes they could sound a bit sloppy, but sometimes, hey, just I don't want it to sound robotic. You know, you have to hear, you know, Rich, not Ableton clock or Tractor clock.
Last question right there.
Hi, Richie. It's less technological, but also has to do with technology. Do you think in the last 5 years, your favorite time to perform was more based on the technology you had and the fact that you felt this connection with the technology and these specific little nuances, or more about the vibe and the people in the city?
I think it's a combination. You know, it's like, no matter how good technology is, when you're up there, Plastic Men can be a little bit more about the technology, because I'm up there, I have a very clear idea of what I want to present, and there's all these things synced up, and so the parameters that I'm working within are a little bit more confining. So whether the crowd is really vibing or not, I'm going to do my thing. With DJing, it's very much about where I'm playing and when, and the people in front of me, and the heat that's coming from the room or from them or not. And you know, right now I feel I actually haven't changed my setup too much in the last 2 or 3 years, and I'm starting to actually get a little bit bored, so probably I will change it again soon. But I felt very confident with my setup the last couple of years, so I really can take that feeling and not think about all the things I'm touching and doing and twiddling, and just let it happen and really feel a connection to that, back to that moment that I'm trying to create, which is a moment that, yeah, we hope we all come into sync.
Cool.
We can have 1 or 2 more questions, as long as I'm, you know, not too late for my next meeting.
Another one in the back. Yep.
Hi. You have always been interacting like with your crowd and with your fans through technology, with Twitter plugins or a mobile app or something like that. So how important is it for you, and do you have anything coming?
I would like to see more of an interaction and more information flow in real time between what I'm doing and the crowd. You know, there's still, you can see me, you know, doing my thing or maybe touching my foot pedal, but I'd like to have some way of people being able to look over my shoulders more. And that's something that we want to develop more. Not everybody wants to do that. I don't want to expect everybody in the audience looking at their phone or, you know, at the TV screens, because, you know, there's so many different ways to experience one of my shows. But I'd like to give different, yeah, let's not say deeper connections to what I'm doing, just different ways of connecting to what I'm doing in real time. You know, it's, we spend a lot of time, you know, checking out how I'm going to play, going through records and do everything else I'm doing. But the moment I step onto stage or into a club, you've got 2, 3, 4 hours of this explosion of kind of spontaneity between everybody. And you know, the closer we can kind of bridge all of us together during that moment, the more interesting I think it can get.
Thank you.
Do we have time for one more? Okay, one more question? Go ahead. Thanks, by the way, for passing the mic around. This is really
Thanks.
much better than having someone run through.
So you talk about finding your own path and being unique creatively. From a producer's perspective, what sort of mindset and what would you suggest to someone who's trying to find that own unique path? Because it can be frustrating sometimes, because being limited in terms of my knowledge as a producer will limit me creatively, you know, so.
Yeah, I think you just got to keep working and writing as much as possible and not be in a rush for, you know, when you're waiting for something to happen, it's not going to happen, or it's like when you're looking at a clock, you know. Don't feel afraid to copy your favorite records or try to make something that what you're hearing, and just keep doing that. And eventually, like, we're all individuals. If everyone's gonna, you know, if we play one record to everyone in here, we're all gonna pick up and tune into a different piece of that music, the drums, the bass line, the vocals, or whatever. So as long as you trust your own individuality, just give it some time and just, you know, let your own uniqueness come out naturally. But this is really, you know, we were just talking the other day, like when the scene was younger, there wasn't, the complexities that there is today. The what's the word? The competition, the rush to be on Beatport top 100 or top 10. None of that really existed. It was just like hanging, playing, working in music, and trying to put a record out. But it was a simpler time, and there seemed to be less of a rush because there was all, you look around you now, all these people, are they all trying to make music? Are they all trying to be the next DJ? Are they my friends? Are they my competition? It's, it's like, chill out. Just, keep at it. Find continuity in your work too. Build upon your ideas, and just don't be in a rush. Something's going to come. It's kind of, sorry, it's not really an inspiring
answer. That's the answer I was looking for. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rich, for...
Cool, thanks for everybody coming.
I want to... We also have a few push stations available at the back to try out, so we invite you to go check out Ableton and Push at the back. And thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks.